And what does the future of sales really look like?
Welcome to Fordify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
Now, our guest today is Crystal Washington. We're on the speaking circuit together. She's also an expert I've followed. I love her stuff. And I've asked her, can you please come on the show? And she said, okay, Ford. She carved time out because the organizations I work with are always interested in increasing sales, and sales has changed. So, Crystal, welcome to Fordify Live.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So, in the work you do with the organizations that you work with, what are you seeing changing? Everybody says sales is changing. There's different generations in the marketplace. Buying behaviors have changed. What are you seeing?
Well, I'm seeing some pretty drastic things happening in both B2B and B2C sales. But one of the most prominent things that we're seeing across the board is that humans are changing. And I think that a lot of organizations are not recognizing that the way we sell needs to be different. By definition, humans are becoming stressed out cyborgs. Now, that might sound a little crazy, but a cyborg is a person who has been mating with, and the second definition of mating, meaning to combine technology. And so many of us wear technology. Some of us have it embedded in us. We sleep with these things. We have multiple, some of us, of these things, right? And so what's happening is, by definition, we're becoming the cyborgs that 1980s movies talked about. We retain less information in here, our biological brain, because we now have these external brains as well. And so how do you sell to a cyborg that isn't just about that relationship with the person, but connecting with them through the devices? That's one. The stressed out piece comes from the fact that since 2020, the whole world, and like you, Ford, I speak to organizations globally, is stressed out and traumatized. There's no other way to put it. Like, I don't care what you believe, what you come from, what culture, everyone's traumatized. It's been a really hard 4 years for people. And so the American Psychological Association puts out this report for every year called Stress in America. And one of their recent ones had a stat unlike anything they've ever seen since they started doing it. 27% of adult respondents said that on most days, they are too stressed to function properly. 27%.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And so when we wonder, why is it so hard now to get our prospects to call us back? Or why does there seem to be so much turnover when we're trying to get through on the deal? Stressed out cyborgs. It's a totally different ballgame. So there's a lot of changes, but that's probably the overarching change that impacts both B2B and B2C. We don't understand the psychology of our clients anymore.
Well, how did you become a futurist? Like, share with our listeners. We're live right now on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and a few other places. And this also becomes the Business Growth Show podcast. So share a little bit about your story, your history. How did you get to have such great insights? Because I have an Aura ring on. I have, phone. I use a lot of AI. So I can see that, because I do. There's been times where I'll look at my schedule, or even the people I've interviewed, and I'm like, oh, I need to interview this person. And my staff says, you just did the interview last week. And I'm like, it's interesting how my short-term memory, I don't commit as many things to long-term memory because I know I've got all these tools. So tell the listeners a little bit about your background and how did you become this expert?
So I'll try to condense it because it's a pretty wild ride. My degree is in hotel and restaurant management. The reason why is they offered me a free education and I understood not having debt. I was going to be a business major originally. Top of my class, but I went into that. But the interesting thing here is I always had an emphasis in sales and marketing. I knew I would be in sales and marketing within that industry. And I did. I graduated, top of my college class, went on to do that. I was both in sales, and then I got bored. The salespeople will appreciate this. I was so good at sales, I would sandbag. I didn't want to go over 125% because I knew they'd adjust my goals. But I was killer right out of college in my institution. But I'm also a millennial, which means we're a little kooky. And I got bored after, I don't know, about 3, 4, 5 years of just, killing in sales. I was like, I feel like I want to do something analytical too, because I'm analytical. So when the revenue manager left my company, I told my boss I want that job. Revenue manager is like the front end of accounting. They do the projections, and they're also in charge of reservations. So, first he was like, no one does that, Crystal. And then I was like, well, you could either give me that role or I could go someplace else.
Right.
And he's like, you kids. Anywho, so forth. I end up in this position. killing it as a revenue manager. There are some marketing functions within that as well. And there's this little thing called social media. And companies weren't using it yet for it. And this, so MySpace was still around. And I remember going to my boss, lovely.
You weren't old enough to know what MySpace was. Come on now.
Yes. Yeah, I'm older than I look. I assure you, I'm a decade older than most people think I am. So I tell my boss, I said, hey, I have a feeling this social media thing's going to be big. I said, and can you imagine? I think it's only a matter of time before companies get on here. An example I gave him, I said, Pepsi can have a conversation with people who love Pepsi, and they'll feel closer to Pepsi as this logo's talking to them. And my boss said, look, kid, I'm going to paraphrase because I can't tell you exactly what he said to me. He said, look, kid,
it's okay.
Or you're going to have to bleep. But he said, look, kid, you're cute and you make us a bleep load of money. Stick to what you know. I said, oh. And so I did a millennial thing. I quit my job and started my own digital marketing firm at that point. Because I just knew this was going to be huge. I started with mom and pop companies. And then from there, I went on to get contracts with Google, Microsoft, British Airways, companies like that. So that was the beginning of me having the firm, but I always had this mindset where I can look around and see signals or trends forward. And then after that, as a matter of speaking, when I started speaking a little bit more, because a lot of my clients are members of organizations, they'd say, Crystal, you and your team do a great job of doing things. Can you explain it? The speaking came from there, but I remember meeting Joyce Goya, who is probably one of the most preeminent futurists, right? She was around from the beginning of futurism in the 1970s as something you do in the workplace. And she pulled me aside and she said, you need to go to U of H, you're there in Houston, and go through their program for futurism because that's what you do. And I met these people and I was like, oh, there's other people who think like me. So that was my route to becoming a futurist, but I was always someone who could look around and see what was coming and show other people kind of how to do that. So now, as a certified futurist, someone who studied foresight, I actually have models for doing it versus trying to explain to people how my brain works.
Well, that's amazing. I know that, when I work with organizations, I've always been known for, business growth and how do you bridge the gap and get more leads and get more influence. And social media, even now in 2024, it's amazing how many organizations are still either not using it effectively or they think it's just for kids and I always tell people, in my opinion, social media websites are just databases. I mean, if you think about it, Facebook, yes, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, they're just databases. And what can you have with a database? Well, you can have a profile and you can share content. So, I mean, I try to break it down. I know it's more than that, and each pond has its own rules, and you want to fish where the fish are. And so I tell people, it's just a database. It's just a communication channel. It gives you insights into your customers, into your prospects, into your ideal client. It gets your finger on the pulse. So when organizations aren't using it, it's really surprising to me. I mean, I work with a lot of franchise brands, and the problem with franchising is they can't if they have 1,500 franchisees, they can't just let them all do everything on social media. So the national brand has to control the overall branch. But I always tell them for local marketing, if you set best practices, it would be beneficial if they were able to have their own Facebook page, if they were able to have their own, ability to even TikTok, I know there's a lot of news right now. Oh, TikTok's going to get banned. Look, it's just a communication channel. I know the Chinese listen, but look at everybody's listening. If whatever we talk about today, if we talk about Costa Rica today, it's going to show up. I mean, I was talking to my wife about getting some new dog food. I have a Labradoodle, and I was saying, hey, we're using Science Diet. Should we get some fresh food? And the next thing I know on TikTok, I'm seeing all these fresh food, natural dog foods. So I don't really, as a marketer, don't care because I feel like I'd rather get things that are relevant to me. My data isn't that big a deal. So anyway, I'm old enough to remember when we put everything in the yellow pages and in the phone book where we gave our information out. So to me, I'm not as scared. But
I remember that.
Yeah, and so with social media, what do you see as the biggest challenge in organizations adapting it or using it effectively?
I think one is understanding it's not a one size fits all approach.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I actually do a lot with financial services and I do a lot with real estate. Those are probably the two that I do the most with. But I speak to a little bit of everybody, like I'm sure you do too. But I do a lot in those two sectors. And oftentimes with financial services, what happens is, especially when we're looking at like wealth managers specifically, there's a lot of laws that prevent what they can do online, okay? But they're getting information or they're seeing how people that sell ladies' shoes or other retail things, how they use social media. And I explained to them, you have a completely different strategy because, especially if you're looking for high net worth individuals, you're on different social networks, you're posting different types of things, or depending on the brokerage and their rules, sometimes I tell them you don't have to post anything. But what I do want you to do is actually use it to gain insights on your clients.
Right.
Understand who they are. When they're posting pictures about them going on vacation with their twin granddaughters for their birthday, that information needs to go into your CRM so that next year you can send them a card for their granddaughter's birthday or some kind of cutesy little thing that shows them you're paying. And let's say I saw on Facebook it was your granddaughter's birthdays last year. Just wanted to send. So tell them how you found out because you don't want to be like spooky and weird. But just the insights you can get from people, the things that they're interested in. And even if you don't post on social media, I give the example to people that sell insurance. I tell people that my insurance broker is not on social media. I told her for years, I'm with the same insurance company, third generation. Okay. And she was like, oh, that's for young people. I don't care, blah, blah, blah. So when I see people that are disgruntled about their insurance and they're like, hey, does anybody else know a good broker or a good person that can help me with insurance? I refer my realtor because she has an insurance company because I trust her. So even by my insurance person just not even having a presence on social media, I can't tag her easily. I'm not going to go into my email, find her signature, paste it in there because if she doesn't care enough to be in there, I'm not going to waste my time, even though I love her. So I think we have to understand that the way we use these things is different depending on who our target market is. And for sure, based on if we're B2C versus B2B. Those are two different ball games.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, so when I work with organizations, I work with a lot of franchise brands. They bring me in to help their franchisees with franchise relations, to monetize their local marketing and to boost sales. And there's a big difference between the local sales and national sales. So I totally agree. And, you know, I always tell people, again, you heard me say it earlier, fish where the fish are. So I'm on TikTok, but I don't have a lot of followers. I really use it to learn because I get micro bites of AI tools that I just can't get anywhere else. So yes, I'm not just watching people dance. I'm actually looking for search terms and trying to get the real things related to AI. And I've had some amazing insights in 30-second bites that really keep me current on what's happening. So I get my news from that and it works. But now my marketing is all done through LinkedIn is where I work. So you know, I'm a fan of Richard Bliss. I've been, you know, speaking like you on social media for years. And when Richard came in and we had him on the show, he's like, Ford, the biggest difference between LinkedIn and all the other platforms is the other platforms reward you for basically pumping and dumping. You're putting content up and you're engaging. LinkedIn is all about the relationship. It's all about the communication. It's all about the conversation. And if you have conversations, your profile will get boosted. And so I learned how the algorithm works from him and I learned how to integrate and do it. And one of the tips he gave me, which I use. So now if I want to speak at ABC Corporation, what I'll do is I'll open up two browsers and I'll leave LinkedIn open on one and my CRM Zoho on another and their website on another. And I'll go to their website and I'll look at their board and I'll connect with their board. I don't ask for anything. I'm not asking like, oh, your profile came up, so I thought we should connect, because I think that's kind of like a little bit of BS.
Yeah.
But I go in, I connect, and what I try to do, Crystal, is I connect with people that are lower level in the organization because they always accept the LinkedIn people. Right. And then I go after the C level, because then when the C level sees, or their assistant who's running their LinkedIn sees it, they're like, oh, he's already connected with several people in our company. They're more likely to do it. So that's my approach to at least getting the connection. But really what I do is I will use user-generated content. So if I wanted to connect with you, I would even if you and I like weren't connected, I would go to your profile and I would post on your posts. So I'd say, congratulations, I saw you just spoke for this financial tech company. Congratulations, I'm sure they loved you. You know, so I'm going to post, and I do that even for other speakers, because if those speakers are speaking at organizations that I want to be introduced to, if I put comments on the thread, the other client is seeing that thread and they're like, oh, well, who's this Ford Saeks guy? Oh, he's a Hall of Fame keynote speaker. Oh, I should check him out. So I use it that way. And I've really found LinkedIn to work there. And then of course, leveraging YouTube effectively with video, because video is such a important tool nowadays, I feel. So those are the two platforms I spend time learning on TikTok, using AI, and then I go to LinkedIn and to YouTube. But I know that like my wife's business is Facebook, but go ahead.
Well, and it's interesting. The strategy you talked about, and I love Richard Bliss. I've seen him speak live. I actually saw his episode with you as well. So he's brilliant. I just thought of something as we were talking about that strategy. You were sharing the strategy for LinkedIn that works in a few other ways as well, because we want to talk about what's changing. So let's say that you have a business where you're getting government contracts. Okay, so we're looking at government contracting. A trend that we've started to see over the last year or so is that organizations are starting to find out, also, one of the reasons because they're starting to use AI and analyzing their contracts, that the longer an organization, a person in a position has a relationship with a company, usually the less ideal the deal is. They're getting the less ideal terms. I don't know if that makes sense. So
no, it made sense. It made sense. Yeah.
And so what they're starting to do, especially in different government agencies, is they're rotating people every year or two so that they're not developing those same relationships. So if you think about your LinkedIn strategy, what's happening is a lot of organizations are getting caught. I can't try to be politically correct in what I say, but they're getting caught, not watching. And so their main contact goes away and they're like, oh no. Now, if they use your strategy where they're now connected to other members instead of a board, but other parts, people that are part of that organization, other people that are in purchasing contracts, all those different things, as they're being rotated around, they still have an into those companies. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because that's a trend that a lot of companies are struggling with right now that do government deals.
Yeah, I have a GSA schedule. So I have a digital agency and we're government approved to work in certain classes, you know how you are with GSA. And so I totally agree with that. And one of the things that always happens when I'm working strategically with a board on their marketing or their marketing plans, I'll go in and do these discovery days where we sit in the conference room and map out their SWOT analysis and their future, their value propositions and all their marketing because they want to move the needles. And what I tell them is the biggest challenge in sales is apathy after the sale. They've made the sale, but they haven't really built the relationship and so what happens is in that case, the buyer moves and they lose the business. I mean, I had a long bank relationship with a bank called Mission Valley Bank. I worked with them for probably 20 years. And Carrie Burrell, the VP who was my contact, is retiring. And so I got a note. She called. She was crying. She's like, "I'm so sorry. I'm retiring. It's been great. You've done such a great job." A week later, I get this letter from their new marketing person. Dear Mr. Saeks, we've decided to go with a different agency because the new buyer comes in. They're young. They want to bring their contacts in. So so I lost that relationship. However, I said, well, I understand. I know you're excited to, go your own direction, but if anything comes up and you run into a jam, please just give me a call. So I didn't burn the bridge. I didn't, blow it up or anything. And so it was interesting because, a week ago, the lady called and she said, "Hey, we're really having trouble with this part. I know we were changing, but what would it cost us for you to do this? And then what would it cost you?" So now slowly I'm getting back in there, but I believe if you deliver great service and you build those relationships, that helps. But like you said, it only because of how high turnover is now and the way they're changing organizations, disruption is everywhere. So what I like about what you do is you have the ability in the model to look forward and say, how do we prepare? It's not how do you avoid, but how do you prepare? So can you share a model or I'm always interested in the future. I have a crystal ball. So I actually have a crystal ball because my clients will say, "Hey, do you know the future?" And I'm like, well, there's certain things that leave clues. So I think I know a little bit, but as a marketer, I'm always smart enough to know I know what I don't know. The more I've learned, the more I realize, you know what? Yeah, a lot of people say I'm really smart in certain things, but there's so much more out there. So what do you do to help executives plan for the future or see the future? Is there a model? Because I'd love to know what it is. I'm going to get my pen, pad. I'm going to be writing it down.
Well, there are a few models, but let's keep it simple. Something that anyone listening to us right now can do. Okay. So with your sales organization, this isn't you can do this individually, but let's look at it as a sales organization. What you want to do is sit down and you want to think about, what are you expecting to happen over the next 5 years? What are you expecting the market to look like, right? So now what we want to do is we want to create 3 kind of doomsday-ish scenarios, like not the extreme, but maybe you have a scenario where there's another epidemic. Maybe you have another scenario where there's a major supply chain disruption. Maybe there's another situation where you have a talent, you don't have enough talent, or whatever that looks like. So in the extreme, but you create 3 scenarios that are highly possible. So you don't want to create something like what happens if a dinosaur eats our office, right? Like that's not a thing, right?
Right.
But you want things that you do not want to happen, but can still happen, even though you don't want to think about it. Because most of the time in organizations, they don't think about these things. Now, once you actually create these 3 scenarios, kind of write out, what does that look like for the company? What all those little things that will happen as a result of this? How does this affect the clients? How does this affect the company? What will likely happen? Will you have to lay off? All these, paint the picture. And you're going to do this 3 different times, but just do one at a time. Now, after you paint that picture, what are 3 things you can do right now within your organization that can put you ahead so that you're in a good position in that future? You do this activity 3 times with those 3 futures. Now, once you're done with all 3, you got your papers for all 3, you've done this as a team, you're going to look at those 3 suggestions that you have for each one of those things that you can do now to prep you. Do any one of those 9 total work for all 3? If so, do that now. Do any of those work for 2? You may want to do that. So if that makes sense, these are things you prep for, you start doing within your organization now so that any of these alternative futures happen, you'll be prepared. If any of those solutions work for all 3, they will work for other scenarios as well. So even if those 3 things don't happen, they're going to put you in a more optimal position as a sales organization. And there's a lot of organizations that have done things like this. Caterpillar Tractor did that, I want to say like in 2006. And while they definitely took a hit in 2007, 2008, if you look at them compared to other organizations, their hit was not nearly as deep as everyone else in their industry. So there's examples, there's some in financial services where they've done this too. So the whole thing is, it's very easy for us to prepare for the future that we're expecting. But humans are horrible at predicting the future, because most humans don't prepare for the future. They prepare for the present with a few small tweaks. Because we have
That's me. I'm a victim of that. I agree.
No, and it's a human brain. So it's not even about it. It takes training to not do that.
Right.
Because we have something called recency bias, which means we overestimate how important things that just very recently happened and that are currently happening, how important they are to the future and how likely they are to continue on. It is a mental block humans have. So doing exercises like this one I gave, there's many different models, but just that one will get you out of that habit and force you to start thinking in terms of contingency plans.
Yeah, I've definitely worked with recency bias in a lot of organizations I work with, because they'll have belief systems that don't serve them. And I'll say, well, if you have a belief that isn't serving you, maybe it's time to get some new beliefs. So I go into organizations, I disrupt them, and I become a catalyst to have them think differently, because most of the time they're stuck in the past, or they're stuck in a belief system that isn't even relevant to the situation right now. And, I always tell people, if you're getting enough leads in sales, it's because you've got the right message, going to the right market, using the right method. And if you don't, if those of you listening right now, we've got all different types of businesses and brands and executives. If what you're doing is working, it's because you've got the right combination of the message, the market, and the method. If what you're doing is not working, that's where you have to start looking. And profit hides a lot of mistakes. Sometimes, Crystal, I'll come into an organization, they're very profitable, they're very successful, and they have all these beliefs. Well, we're successful because of A, B, C, and D. But I always question the premise, like where are you getting this data? Like, where the data doesn't show this. Like, can I see the conversion? Can I see the analytics? Can I see something that supports it other than just the bottom line dollars? And when I tell them profit hides a lot of mistakes, look, yes, you're profitable, but how much are you wasting? You're spending all this money in X, Y, and Z that really isn't even supporting synergistically to the whole movement of your brand. So I think that the real takeaway that you shared is, if you're asking the wrong question, the answer doesn't matter. So really asking better questions.
Well, that and so, for instance, you go into these organizations, you're helping them identify what's working and what isn't. I would be the next step because even if everything's working right now, that doesn't mean it's going to work well in 5 years from now. And you've seen this, Ford. You've seen organizations that when they're cooking, they're not, some of them aren't doing enough to feed their funnels, right? This is
Right.
a step further than even that. This is even about the funnel piece. You can do everything right now, but in different market conditions, in different, if your customer base shifts thinking, all the things you're doing right may not work into the future. So part of what I do then is, okay, you've got everything done right. You're balancing out, but let's make sure that you're going to have relevancy and be able to continue 5, 10, 20 years from now. There's things we have to do now so that you're prepared for then. But most organizations, they wait until what is that book? Who Moved My Cheese? They wait until their
Right.
cheese is moved, right? And then they're like, no, versus me saying, well, where are all the places they can move your cheese so that now keep doing the things that are working, but there's a few things we need to put into place so that if we have to shift fast, you're already having the plan in place to do it. And the mentality has already, because it's a big piece, has already been deposited into your people so that they understand that we have to be agile. And I know some people hate that word, but
No,
so
it's
that
a
they
great. They
understand,
overuse it the wrong way, just like culture. But I think it's a great word.
yeah, but so that they already know, okay, the future is going to bring change. I heard Mike Rayburn, another wonderful speaker friend of ours, say before, time breaks everything, right? So that they understand, your team understands, there's going to come a point where you're going to have to make some shifts. Don't worry, we were all planning together for this, but when it's time for us to jump as a team, we're all going to jump together. So that's kind of where I come in to help people prepare so they're not caught off guard.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this today on the Business Growth Show podcast, we're talking to Crystal Washington. You can look at her, find her online on social media, but of course, crystalwashington.com. So, Crystal, I had another futurist on my show. His name is Dan Burris. He's probably got the most followers on LinkedIn. I think he's got a couple million compared to a few thousand that a lot of us have. And one
Right.
of the things he talked about, he actually created a book because agile was one of the things that was everybody was talking. All the futurists, well, hey, we have to be agile. We have to be able to adapt. And the word pivot, right? It was pivot. We have to be able to change
Oh,
directions. And his book was on anticipatory. So how do you anticipate as opposed to waiting for the impact and then be agile, but actually looking ahead? And I think that's what you do too. As a futurist, you're going into organizations and you're helping them give vision and give, supervision down the road as opposed to what's right in front of them. And I think that's just so impactful, especially for sales organizations and the exercises that you were talking about. I think that's really a great exercise that everybody can do is to really look at, okay, in the future, what could happen? And do we have a contingency plan? Now, when I work in financial services myself, I work with a lot of community banks and banks. In order to be a vendor, I have to show them what my disaster plan looks like. What's my backup plan look like? What because they aren't going to hire me if I don't have a
right,
plan in place for what if I have a tornado? Is their data
right.
secure? So I've had to do that and learn that in the 80s. I know it's a long time ago, but I had to learn how to plan for some of those things, but I never looked at it down the road like that. Any last comments or insights that you want to share?
I do want to share something. The future is not, most of us have a misconception on what the future is, Ford. And I think this is a good point for us to end on. We think that the future is something that's already solid and formed and it lands on us. And when it lands on us, we have to deal with it. But the future leaves Easter eggs. And anybody that does gaming or anything like that understands Easter eggs are clues. So it tells us kind of what's coming. And when you think about, I give the example of like taxi companies. The future didn't just happen to taxi companies. Taxi companies figured that their clients could not go anywhere, right? Where else are you going to go? And no one had more data than them on what needed to shift. If you think about it, all they had to do was stop talking to their white collar people for a minute, because we tend to get caught up in the C-suite and everything, or the leaders, the owners, and talk to their dispatchers. And if they ask their dispatchers, what issues are you seeing every single day? And this is across the globe. Dispatchers would have said things like, oh my gosh, people keep calling, trying to figure out where their transportation is. They keep calling back, how close is it? Or people are saying they can't get rides in certain neighborhoods. Again, global problem. But instead, taxi companies did not go to those people. They listened to their C-suite. Similarly, I think Blockbuster is another good example where they pulled out of the Netflix, but in the end, they had all the data they needed to make the better decision if they had talked to the cashiers at the store units, who would have told them people come in there every day upset because they can't find the videos they're looking for. They're mad about these return fees. They would have seen that Netflix business model would have made sense. It's one of the future. And so for anyone listening to us, Ford, I think the thing I'd want to leave them with is outside of the model I shared, and this is something I do when I come into organizations, I don't come in with all the solutions. I know how to ask the right questions and get the right people in the room. The Easter eggs that you need to make shifts within your organization, in the sales department or otherwise, it's usually lying with your frontline people, the people that are having the conversations with the clients and the customers. In hotels, when I've worked with hotels, and I've worked with some large hotels and gaming companies, I tell them, I want you to bring the shoe shine folks in here. I
Yep.
want you to bring the housekeepers in here because they're hearing and seeing things that your C-suite is not hearing and seeing. And they have a lot of answers. They may not know it, but if you ask them the right questions, they're going to give you the Easter eggs. And so the future, for anyone that's listening to us right now, Ford, it's not just going to fall on you. There's clues right now into what you need to do and adjust for if you ask the right questions of the frontline people.
Well, I was thinking about hitting my ending screen and bringing the intro out, or the exit out, but I want to take us in another direction. I want to extend this. Do you have a few more minutes?
I'll
Okay.
make time for you.
All right, so let's do this. Here's my question. So right now, AI is disrupting everything. And as keynote speakers ourselves, everybody with a laptop is now an AI speaker. I mean, I've seen all these people in the National Speakers Association that were leadership speakers and culture speakers, and all of a sudden they're AI speakers. It's like anybody can do it. And I know I speak on AI, but I only look at technology. Does it help me improve production, performance, and productivity, and make better decisions? So I'm curious, do you see any Easter eggs? How do you see the future being? Because when I look forward, well, I want to hear from you first, but I'm curious, what do you think the disruption is going to be with AI and AI technologies as a futurist?
So first off, I normally answer smaller questions. This is a broad one, but I can give a little bit on this. Yes, there are going to be some job losses, but I really think right now we're in a pivotal point, similar to electricity, similar to the desktop computer, whereas everybody, kind of had to adapt to that. There's a lot of friction around specifically generative AI because it scares people, right? What it does is it makes us all more efficient. And so just like a computer, if you think about all the things you can get done in a day with a computer, so just like the 1970s where we had to do everything manually, you think about how much more gets done now. Generative AI feeds into that external brain we talked about, right? And so it's basically going to turn us into superhumans. So that's number one. It's not anything to be scared of. And because we have a labor shortage globally, it's not just getting rid of people, it's actually filling holes that we've already identified. We also know we have a knowledge shortage in certain careers. We've known that for a while. So this can help us fill the gaps in healthcare. This can help us fill some of the gaps in some of the other areas as well.
Yeah, I think keep going.
Okay. The other thing that, and I don't do predictions very often, but the other thing that I see happening is I think that people are also becoming very much overwhelmed with technology. And so there will be a lot of business opportunities for technology breaks. That's the reason why we're seeing younger generations, Gen Z and the one coming after them, they're not Luddites because they can use the technology, but we're not seeing them on as many social networks. They don't want to be open up to the world as a whole, like influencers do.
Right.
But most of them, if you look at kids now, they're not just trying to, my generation, millennials, were the ones who wanted to have reality shows via social media. We were all stars and we were special butterflies. The next generation is opposite of that, because if you imagine being born, which is a weird thing to say to someone, but you imagine you're born, you're coming out of your mother's womb, right? And the moment you're out there, someone's pointing a camera phone at your face and putting you on YouTube and Facebook and everything else. They didn't have privacy, so they're drawing back. We're seeing other people that are becoming overwhelmed. Thank you, American Psychological Association, for putting things out there, partially due to this technology uptick. So I think it's going to make us much more efficient. I think there's going to be a lot of business opportunities to help people unplug, become less connected. I think that we're going to see, and we're already seeing some addiction type qualities, so treatments for that. So it's going to be, I think it's very Dickinsonian, a tale of two cities. It's the best of times, it was the worst of times.
Yeah, I see that too. I've been working on this a lot, and I can, one of the things I've been known for is in market trends, I can see things not because I have some great intellect, but just because of I've been doing this since I was 15 years old, looking at the future. So, decades and decades of looking and seeing how things change. And so I believe that it's going to be the biggest disruption. You mentioned electricity and things. I think it's going to be bigger than the wheel and fire. I mean, I think it's going to be the biggest disruption. I think it's going to have a whole sentient being. I think it's going to change relationships. And my wife's a Pilates instructor. She has studios and teaches and certifies other instructors. And I keep telling her, do a disconnected retreat. Do a retreat where there's no technology, and I guarantee people will come. Because it's just like speakers have said to me, well, Ford, is AI going to replace, speakers? Because you can have an avatar like this.
Hey, Ford, your instant avatar is ready. Feel free to create videos with it. Also, click the feedback button to share what you think. Hope you enjoy.
So, that's just a video. So how do you tell reality? That wasn't even me speaking. That was just a fake AI. And so what I see is, I think that the in-person meetings that you and I both do, whether it's an opening or closing keynote or an on-site training, being that personal touch is going to become really important. I think as organizations prepare, whatever your business is, that you need to prepare. How do you work with your team? How do you communicate with your customers? How do you build those strong relationships? Because I think the technology is going to overwhelm to the point where, like you said, with the younger generations now, where they're pulling back. So I just wanted to ask you about that, because I'm asking all my guests about that, and especially you being a futurist. But I think you're right. You're spot on. And I think that one of the exercises people should do is go back to what you shared earlier and look for the scenarios. How is AI going to, one of the things, how, not just a pandemic or a supply chain issue, but how is AI going to disrupt with the minimum wage going up in California? Now you're seeing all the robotic fast food places, quick serve restaurants, because they're doing it. It's the same thing when you talked about with the taxis, and I totally agree. I remember calling a taxi, it'd be a 45-minute wait. Now you open your phone, you can see the car, you know exactly when it's going to be there. So I'm interested to see where it goes. I hope you'll come back on the show. So thank you so much for being a guest on Fordify Live.
Thank you so much for having me, Ford.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Fordify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.